Hello, welcome to dsssb. If you are preparing for any competitive exam, then this video is going to be very useful for you. In this video, we are going to read Class 11th Standard Political Science, Chapter 4, Executive. So, I requested that if you are new to my channel, then please do subscribe, like, and also comment and share your feedback about this video. So, this video is intended for revision purpose only, and this is the summary of this whole chapter. So in this video, we are going to read about the executives. Legislature, executive and judiciary are the three organs of the government. Together, they perform the functions of the government, maintain law and order, and look after the welfare of the people. The Constitution ensures that they work in coordination with each other and maintain a balance among themselves. In a parliamentary system, executive and legislatures are interdependent. The legislature controls the executive and in turn is controlled by the executive. In this chapter, we shall discuss the composition, structure and function of the executive organ of the government. This chapter will also tell you about the changes that have occurred in recent times due to political practice. After reading this chapter, we will be able to make a distinction between the parliamentary and the presidential executive. We will also understand the constitutional position of the President of India. We also know the composition and functioning of the Council of Ministers and the importance of the Prime Ministers, and we will be able to understand the importance and functioning of the administrative machinery. So, as we know that this video is the summary of this whole chapter, and I tried to cover all the important and main points of this chapter. In a democracy, people participate in electoral process and directly choose their representatives. Our constitution lays down some rules to ensure free and fair elections. Legislature, executive and judiciary are the three organs of the government, and together they perform the functions of the government, maintain law and order, and look after the welfare of the people. The Constitution ensures that they work in coordination with each other and maintain a balance among themselves. In a parliamentary system, executive and legislatures are interdependent. The legislature controls the executive and in turn is controlled by the executive. So what is the meaning of executives? Executive is the branch of government responsible for the implementation of laws and policies adopted by the legislature and is often involved in framing of policy. The executive branch is not just about presidents, prime ministers and ministers and extends to the administrative machinery that is called civil servants. So what are the types of executives? First, it is political executives, the head of government and their ministers who are saddled with the overall responsibility of government policy. Secondly, it is permanent executive. Those who are responsible for day-to-day administration is called permanent executives. Types of executives. So here is a data form that what types of executives. First one is system based on the principles of collective leaderships and second is system based on individual leaderships. In parliamentary executives, it is the head of the government and is usually known as Prime Minister. Prime Minister is the leader of the majority party in the legislature and he is accountable to the legislature. The head of the state may be constitutional monarchy and president. Then it is parliamentary republic and both are the ceremonial executives. In semi-presidential system, has the president as the head of the state and has a prime minister as the head of the government. PM and his councils are responsible to the legislature. And system based on individual leadership has the presidential leaderships. President is the head of the state and he is also the head of the government. The president is usually directly elected by the people and he is not accountable to the legislature. So here you can understand the types of executives. In type of executives, in presidential system, the office of the president is very powerful. For example, like United States and Brazil. In parliamentary system, example, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, these states have the parliamentary state system. The prime minister is the head of the government and president or a monarch is the nominal head of the state. The role of president or monarch. It is primarily ceremonial and prime minister along with the cabinet wields effective powers. A semi-presidential state. For example, France, Russia, Sri Lanka. It has both a president and a prime minister, but unlike parliamentary system, the president may possess significant day-to-day powers. The possibility of conflict. Sometimes the president and PM may belong to the same party and sometimes to two different parties, and thus would be opposed to each other, and there is possibility of conflict. So here is country and their systems. In USA, it is a presidential system. Canada, there is parliamentary democracy with a constitutional monarchy. France, there is semi-presidential system. The president appoints the prime minister as well as the ministers but cannot dismiss them as they are responsible to the parliament. In Japan, it is parliamentary system with the emperor as the head of the state and the prime minister as the head of the government. In Italy, there is parliamentary system with the president as the formal head of the state and the prime minister as the head of the government. Russia, the semi-presidential system where president is the head of the state and prime minister who is appointed by the president is the head of the government. Germany, parliamentary system in which president is the ceremonial head of the state and chancellor is the head of the government. So now we will read about the parliamentary executive in India. In India, the experience of India with parliamentary system. India had some experience of running the parliamentary system under the Acts of 1919 and 1935. The constitution makers wanted to ensure that government would be sensitive to public expectation and would be responsible and accountable. The other alternative to the parliamentary executive was the presidential form of the government, which puts much emphasis on the president as the chief executive and source of all executive power. There is always the danger of personality cult in presidential executive. But in parliamentary form, there are many mechanisms that ensures that the executive will be answerable to and controlled by the legislature or people's representatives. Parliamentary systems of India. The constitution adopted the parliamentary system of executive for the governments both at the national and state levels. So at national level, the constitution vests the executive power of the union formally in the president who is the formal head of the state of India. The president exercises those powers through the council of ministers headed by the prime minister and the prime ministers and the council of ministers run the government. At the state level, the executive comprises the governor and the chief ministers and the council of ministers. The president. The president is elected for a period of 5 years. And the election, there is no direct election by the people for the office of president. Voters, the elected MLAs and MPs are the voters. And the procedures, this election takes place in accordance with the principle of proportional representation with single transferable vote. Removal. The president can be removed from office only by parliament by following the procedure for impeachment by which requires a special majority, and the only ground for the impeachment is violation of the constitution. Power and position of president. As a formal head of the government, the president has wide-ranging executive, legislative, and judicial emergency powers. In a parliamentary system, these powers are in reality used by president only in the advice of the council of ministers. The prime minister and council of ministers have support of the majority in the Lok Sabha and they are real executive. In most of the cases, the president has to follow the advice of the council of ministers. So, what is in the Article 74, Para 1? That there shall be a council of ministers with the Prime Minister at the head to aid and advise the President, who shall, in the exercise of his functions, act in accordance with such advice, provided that the President may require the Council of Ministers to reconsider such advice, and the President shall act in accordance with an advice tendered after such reconsideration. So, what are the discretionary powers of President? Constitutionally, the President has the right to be informed of all important matters and deliberations of the Council of Ministers. The Prime Minister is obliged to furnish all the information that the President may call for. The President often writes to the Prime Minister and expresses his views on the matters confronting the country. Three situations where the President can exercise the powers using his or her own discretion. The President can send back the advice given by the Council of Ministers and ask the Council to reconsider the decision. Acts on his or her own discretion. When the President thinks that the advice has certain flaws or legal lacuna, or that it is not in the best interest of the country, the President can ask the Council to reconsider the decision. As for the amendment, it was decided that President can ask the Council of Ministers to reconsider its advice, but has to accept the reconsidered advice. What is veto power? Veto power is very important. Veto power, by which he can withhold or refuse to give assent to bills other than any bill passed by the Parliament. So, veto power is the power in which he or she, the President, can withhold or refuse to give assent to the bills. Every bill passed by the Parliament goes to the President for his assent to become a law. The President can send the bill back to the Parliament asking it to reconsider the bill. This veto power is limited because if the Parliament passes the same bill again and send it back to the President, then the President has to give assent to that bill. However, there is no mention in the Constitution about the time limit within which the President must send the bill back for reconsideration. Pocket veto. The President can just keep the bill pending with him without any time limit. It gives the President an informal power to use the veto in a very effective manner. So here is some additional information. In 1986, the Parliament passed the Indian Post Office Amendment Bill, and the criticism of this bill is that it sought to curtail the freedom of the press. The then President Gyani Jail Singh did not take any decision on this bill, and the next President Venkataraman sent the bill back to the Parliament for reconsideration. But the government had changed and the new government did not bring the bill back before the Parliament, so the bill could never become a law. Discretion arises more out of political circumstances. Formally, the President appoints the Prime Minister when a leader has the support of the majority in the Lok Sabha. Sometimes, after an election, no leader or an alliance has a clear majority in the Lok Sabha, or 2 or 3 leaders are claiming of majority support in the House. In such a situation, the President has to use his own discretion in judging who really may have the support of the majority or who can actually form and run the government. So, what scope for presidential assertiveness is that when governments are not stable and coalitions occupy power. What is the need of the President? In the parliamentary system, the Council of Ministers is dependent on the support of the majority in the legislature, so it may be removed and replaced at any time. In such a situation, requires the head of the state who has a fixed term and who may be empowered to appoint the PM, who may symbolize the entire country. When no party has a clear majority, the President has the additional responsibility of making a choice and appointing the Prime Minister to run the government of the country. The Vice President of India. The term of Vice President of India is elected for 5 years. And what is the election method? It is similar to that of President, and only difference is that member of state legislatures are not part of the electoral college. And what is the removal process? The Vice President may be removed from his office by a resolution of the Rajya Sabha passed by a majority and agreed to by the Lok Sabha. What is the role of Vice President of India? The Vice President acts as the ex officio chairman of the Rajya Sabha and takes over the office of the President when there is a vacancy by reason of death, resignation, removal by impeachment, or otherwise. The Vice Presidents act as the President only until a new President is elected. For example, B.D. Jatti acted as President on the death of Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad until a new President was elected. Prime Ministers and Council of Ministers. The President exercises his powers only on the advice of the Council of Ministers, which is headed by the Prime Ministers. So now we will read about the Prime Minister. In the parliamentary form of executive, it is essential that the Prime Minister has the support of the majority of the Lok Sabha. So he or she loses the office if the support of the majority is lost. Since 1989, various political parties have come together and formed a coalition that has majority in the House. A person is appointed PM who is acceptable to most partners of the coalitions. The Prime Minister allocates ranks and portfolios to the ministers. So what is Council of Ministers? The Prime Minister decides who will be the ministers in the Council of Ministers. Secondly, the ministers are given the ranks of Cabinet Minister, Minister of State, and Deputy Minister. Similarly, Chief Minister of the State choose ministers from their own party or coalitions. So, what is the size of the Council of Ministers? 91st Amendment Act 2003. So, according to 91st Amendment Act 2003, the Council of Ministers shall not exceed 15% of total number of members of that House of the People or Assembly or the States. So, here number is the 15% of total number of members of the House of the People. And before this, the size of the Council of Ministers were determined according to the exigencies of time and requirements of this situation. The minister birth was used as temptation to win over the support of the members of the parliament. So here is some important information that the Prime Minister and all the ministers must be member of the parliament. If someone becomes a minister or the Prime Minister without being an MP, such a person must get elected to the parliament within 6 months. So what is the time period? Within 6 months, such person must get elected to the parliament. Executive under control and supervision of the legislature. The Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. Council of Ministers which loses confidence of the Lok Sabha is obliged to resign. Collective responsibility. It is based on the principle of the solidarity of the cabinet. It implies that a vote of no confidence, even against a single minister, leads to the resignation of the entire council of the ministers. So here important to understand that it is based on the principles of the solidarity of the cabinet. And it implies only when that a vote of no confidence, even against a single minister, leads to the resignation of the entire council of ministers. Binding on all ministers to pursue or agree to a policy. It indicates that if a minister does not agree with a policy or a decision of the cabinet, he or she must either accept the decision or resign. So, what is the preeminent position of Prime Minister? Council of Ministers cannot exist without the Prime Minister. The council comes into existence only after the Prime Minister has taken the oath of office. The death or resignation of the Prime Ministers automatically brings about the dissolution of the Council of Ministers. But the demise, dismissal, or resignation of a minister only creates a ministerial vacancy. It acts as a link between the Council of Ministers on the one hand and the President as well as the Parliament on the other. It is this role of Prime Minister which led by Pandit Nehru to describe him as the linchpin of the government. So, here is an additional information that it is the role of the Prime Minister which led Pandit Nehru to describe him as the linchpin of the government. What are the constitutional obligations on Prime Ministers? So, the constitutional obligation on Prime Ministers is to communicate to the President all decisions of the Council of Ministers relating to the administration of the affairs of the Union and proposals for legislation. The Prime Minister is involved in all crucial decisions of the government and decides on the policies of the government. Power wielded by the Prime Minister flows from various sources: control over the Council of Ministers, leadership of the Lok Sabha, command over the bureaucratic machines, access to the media, projection of the personalities during elections, and projection as well as national leader during international summitry as well as foreign visits. So, these are the power wielded by the Prime Minister. Political conditions affecting the power of Prime Ministers. First is unassailable. Whenever a single political party has secured majority in the Lok Sabha, and weak is that coalition government sometimes be removed or resigned due to the loss of support. So, the effect of coalition government on the working of the parliamentary executive. Firstly, it has resulted in growing discretionary role of president in the selection of prime ministers. Next, it has necessitated much more consultation between political partners, leading to the erosion of prime ministerial authority. It has also brought restriction on various prerogatives of the prime ministers, like choosing the ministers and deciding their ranks and portfolios. Next, even the policies and programs of the government cannot be decided by the prime ministers alone. Policies are framed after a lot of negotiation and compromises among the allies, and the prime minister has to act more as negotiator than as leader of the government. Parliamentary executive at state level. A similar parliamentary executive exists, though with some variations. So, what are the important variations? The important variations are that government of the state appointed by the president on the advice of the central government, and though the chief minister, like the prime minister, is the leader of the majority party in the assembly, the governor has more discretionary powers. The main principles of the parliamentary system operate at the state level too. Now we will read about the permanent executive. Permanent executive means the bureaucracy. The executive organ of the government includes the prime minister, the ministers, and a large organization called the bureaucracy or the administrative machinery. To underline the difference between the machinery and the military service, it is described as civil service. Trained and skilled officers who work as permanent employees of the government are assigned the task of assisting the ministers in formulating policies and implementing these policies. So, role of bureaucracy. In a democracy, the elected representatives and the ministers are in charge of government, and the administration is under their control and supervision. The administrative officers cannot act in violation of the policies. The administrative officer cannot act in violation of the policies adopted by the legislature. It is the responsibility of the ministers to retain political control over the administration. India has established professional administrative machinery. At the same time, the machinery is made politically accountable and expected to be politically neutral, as bureaucracy will not take any political position on policy matters. So, What are the system of Indian bureaucracy? So Indian bureaucracy has enormously complex system as it consists of all India services, state services, employees of the local governments and technical and managerial staff running public sector undertakings. So here is a graph that represented the classification of civil services. Firstly, it is all India services, that is Indian Administrative Service or Indian Police Service, like IS officers or IPS officers. Secondly, it is central services like Indian Foreign Services and Indian Revenue Services, that is IFS and IRS. And thirdly, it is state services like sales tax officers like DM and collectors. Impartial selection based on merit. So it is the selection process of civil servants. So the Union Public Service Commission has been entrusted with the task of conducting the process of recruitment of the civil servants of the Government of India. Similar public service commissions are provided for the states also. The members of the Public Service Commissions are appointed for a fixed term and their removal or suspension is subject to a thorough inquiry made by Judge of the Supreme Court. More representative. The Constitution has provided for reservation of jobs for the Dalits and Adivasis. Subsequently, they have also been provided for women and other backward classes. Persons selected by the UPSC for Indian Administrative Service and Indian Police Service constitute the backbone of the higher level bureaucracy in the states. An IS or IPS officer is assigned to a particular state where he or she works under the supervision of the state government. Key administrative officers of the states are under the supervision of the state government in place of the central government. However, the IS or IPS officers are appointed by the central government. They can go back into the service of the central government. Only the central government can take disciplinary action against them, and apart from the IS and IPS officers appointed by the UPSC, the administration of the state is looked after by officers appointed through the State Public Service Commission. So, what are the issues with the bureaucracy? The bureaucracy is insensitive to ordinary citizens. People are afraid of approaching to the government officers. Political interference. Interference turns the bureaucracy into an instrument in the hands of the politicians. And there are less provisions for protecting the civil servants from political interference. Not enough provisions. It also failed that enough provisions are not there to ensure the accountability of the bureaucracy to the citizens. There is an expectation that measures like right to information may make the bureaucracy a little more responsive and accountable. So here is some interesting points of this chapter is that semi-presidential executive and Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, the system of executive presidency was introduced in 1978. Under this, the people directly elect the president. The president has vast powers under the constitutions. The president chooses the prime minister from the party that has a majority in the parliament. Though ministers must be the members of the parliament, the president has the power to remove the prime ministers or ministers. So, this is the whole summary of this whole chapter. I tried to cover all the important topics and points of this chapter in a very easy way. So, if you like this video, then please do like, share and do comment. To support my channel, please do subscribe. Thank you very much for watching this video.